And he will need it. All right, let's bring in the rest of our panel on this. We got Evan Stavisky, Democratic strategist and partner at the Parkside Group. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Bill O'Reilly, Republican consultant and columnist for Newsday. And Andrew, who you've already met. And Evan, I'll start with you. First of all, there's a debate about maybe the president oversold the dire consequences coming down the pike, and that for both process reasons and other, a lot of people aren't going to feel this, and then they're going to say Chicken Little on the president. What do you think? Will the public feel these cuts that are in all likelihood going to happen at the end of the week?
There's definitely a lot of pain to be felt from the very minor financial but real impact end, where there's a droga funding that was already paid for is going to be impacted. The Sandy aid that was just approved, in the last few weeks, they're talking about as much as $3 billion lost, all the way down to, I saw estimates of tens of thousands of vaccinations won't be available to school children. So there'll definitely be some pain. Will the government stop operating? No, but there'll definitely be
That's
some
at the
pain.
end of the month.
Not till the end of the month.
Dominic, bigger surprise here, that the president underestimated the other side, or that the Republicans didn't blink when you're talking about, as it relates to defense, at least as much as a 7% cut across the board with real material impacts. I mean, even things like, for example, West Point. I'm not even talking about the men and women already in uniform. A real cut that's going to happen on the campus. And then the idea of furloughing military folks and at a time of war. Who do you think is more surprised today that we sit 4 days away from the sequestration?
Well, I don't think that the president underestimated the other side, the Republicans in this case. I think that the president responsibly inform the American public of what's coming ahead. Now, we may sit here and say, the impact is not going to be heartfelt immediately, but if you're one of those furloughed workers and you're being told, no, you're not going to work on Friday, and your paycheck is going to reflect that 2 weeks from now, then this is a major cut for your family. And on with some of the cuts that Evan just mentioned. I think that the president did the right thing, and I believe, and I think I'm being fair in this, that the Republicans are going to take a hit for this. The president will take some, but they're going to take more of a hit.
Bill, there's a debate about who pays the political price, but one thing within the Republican Party is it used to always be that the hawks, the military voices, always overrode, if there was, in this particular case, the Tea Party folks, the small government types. It seems to flip.
I think that John McCain and Lindsey Graham are overplaying their hand too, just as I think the president's doing. I remember David Dinkins in 1992, there was a budget crisis, and he said, we're going to have to turn out every other streetlight in the city. I mean, come on, give me a break. That's not where the cuts have to come from. I think both sides have overplayed this entirely. I think on the president's side, though, this is a cover your keister move for if the economy goes back into a recession in a month or two. Then he can turn back and say, look, the Republicans did it. This was the impetus to put us back in the recession. I think that's what this is about.
Whoever gets the blame, Andrew, nobody thinks this is the smartest way about running a candy store, let alone a government, especially at this time. There are people saying, hey, this is an opportunity. We might have 3 months of dysfunction here, but at the end of the day, this is our chance for a grand bargain. We're going to try and put something together, and we got March 27th staring us at the barrel. Any reason to think that they can get their act together here out of even political self-interest? I mean, look at what the president said today. We didn't even talk about it, but he talked about Medicare, saying, yeah, we're going to need to make some adjustments to Medicare here. It seems to be some signaling that at least some sides are looking here at making some concessions.
Get their acting here, a grand bargain between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party as we know them right now. What gives you any reason to believe that would happen? I don't think much of what we're seeing here is a surprise. I don't think the fact that a deal can't seem to be agreed upon before we hit sequestration is a surprise. I don't think the blame game is much of a surprise. I don't think the lack of a grand bargain is much of a surprise.
Don't you think that there's a point where there may be, we'll debate on the number, but let's say 70 members in the House who say, let it burn. I want the government, if it means shutting it down, smaller government, hooray. I'll even light the match. But 70 members isn't a big number when it's all said and done. People don't think shutting down our government, let alone sequestration, is good for this country right now, whatever your politics are. So don't you think there's enough people with the same common interest? Some might say, we should be taxing more to the 1%. Other people say, please, fewer regulations on business. But they don't think a shut down government is good for America. Doesn't that trump the crazy?
I don't think so, only because I don't think there's been any political penalty for playing these kinds of brinksmanship games up until now. So why would anybody on Capitol Hill think there would be a penalty going forward for these kinds of brinksmanship games?
Because, Evan, we've always had an 11th hour deal until now. This time we're not going to have an 11th hour deal, it doesn't look like, barring a huge surprise.
Well, sure, but you got to remember, as far as politics trumping the crazies, the Congress has, what is an 11% approval rating. It's really hard for them to pay much more of a political price. Let's also remember that the whole sequestration fight boils down to one thing, and that's redistricting. House Democrats got 1.4 million more votes than House Republican candidates, but they don't have the majority.
I agree with you, but my only point is, at the end of the day, somebody still has to win something for this. I don't see anybody winning if the government shuts down here in about 30 days. There's no upside for either party for that.
I'm just not sure that the House Republicans necessarily can feel pain quite the same way, because most people vote against them. An overwhelming majority of Americans hold them in poor regard. So what's exactly the incentive for them to keep to use the term earlier, the crazies under control?
I buy the districting math, but there still has to be a certain point to say, you know, the country. This isn't good for the country.
I think the only winner that comes out of this in the end is the public, because I think that the government needs to bottom out. I think Congress has to hit rock bottom before it reforms itself.
How lower can
and we're getting close, and we got to be getting close.
But you heard
Please,
Tom
dear
Coburn,
God, let us be getting close.
You heard Tom Coburn this Sunday saying, you know, he doesn't like the idea of the sequestration, but the debt's the bigger worry. And if we don't tackle that, then, you know, calamity and fire from the sky and all those terrible things. But as long as there's a substantial portion of lawmakers who think that that's the case, what's their incentive to avoid sequestration? It's a good thing.
Because there's a way to
get disorganized cuts, yeah.
Yeah, it's just, I mean,
if you're not dealing with the entitlement programs, with the non-discretionaries, you're gonna wreck the rest of the
and by
budget.
the way, they
you're
don't
kill
get
the
to
social
say
safety
where it's
net.
going to come from. The CBO decides. I mean, this is one part they don't realize. For all the people who hate government, government's going to decide, you know, what they're going to do here. And Boehner, by the way, called this, you know, now all of a sudden he's saying, he called this a meat axe, that they were going to use the whole process of sequestration. Nobody thinks this is a way to run a business here, let alone a government. All right, we take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to head to another part of the world here that is set for some change, and that is the Vatican. The Pope is preparing to step down. An almost unprecedented event. You got to go back 600 years, in fact, the next time the church has tackled this. We're going to talk about the role and who that next pope might be, that they'll be walking into a very interesting situation in history here. Stay with us. We'll be right back.